Good afternoon. I'm Cindi Howson, Chief Data Strategy Officer at ThoughtSpot, joining you from beautiful New Jersey to talk about the top trends in data and analytics and AI. But more importantly, what you as a data and analytics leader should do about them. Now, some of you have known me for a very long time, and as I put together these trends this year, I was thinking, why was it so much harder to develop the trends? Is it, well, a pandemic, or is it also the pace of change? So if I think back maybe 10, 12 years, remember those good old days when you would have a new software release every 3 years? And only as far as 5 years ago, maybe it was once a year. Now with the cloud, exciting times, right? It's every week, continuous updates. That makes it harder for you to plan what to do. So I want to take you further back in time. And as we're in summer and many of us are just so excited to get back out on vacations around the world, I'm going to ask you to think back to maybe when you were 10 years old at your favorite beach. For me, it would be the Jersey Shore. I think Randy Bean, that was probably Cape Cod. And Ellen, the CDO of Chevron, I'm picturing you driving from Germany down to the Côte d'Azur or maybe Portugal in the Algarve. And remember that magical age when anything was possible. And I want to ask you, what did you want to be when you grew up? For some of you, was it a doctor, president, musician, rock star musician? I know Doug Laney, the chair of the MIT conference, was dreaming of being a professional photographer. Did any of you dream of being a chief data officer? No, probably not. And yet, how exciting is this? But this role, the first job of chief data officer coming out of financial services, it's only about 15 years old. It's a new role. There's a lot of struggles as we decide who owns what. How do you measure business value? Who's responsible for what? But hold on to that idea of anything is possible. Because if 2020 showed us anything, really, Mission Impossible is possible. A typical vaccine takes 10 years to develop. Drug manufacturers developed a COVID vaccine in 9 months. Why? Yes, it was the spread of this awful virus, but it was also powered by data, that we could get to this data faster and new ways of collaborating. Who would have thought competitors would share their data, allow others to train their machine learning models on one another's data? New ways of working is at the heart of those who are really leading in data and analytics. So why is this so important for you to keep up with the top trends and the innovation now more than ever before? Because the gap has widened between those who are leading in analytics and those who are laggards. Now, many of you say you feel stuck in the middle. I'm hoping by the mere fact that you're attending this MIT conference, comparing notes, strategizing, learning and listening, that it puts you a little more towards the leaders. But that gap, 2 to 3 times the revenue growth of those who say they are truly a data-driven organization and those who are not. So what are the top 6 trends and what should you do about them? The first is the fight to survive is replacing fear in 2021. 2020, a lot of you were forced to react quickly, pivot quickly. 2021, it's about being much more strategic and intentional where you place your innovation and investment bets. Secondly, customer experience analytics takes center stage. Oftentimes we think, yeah, supply chain matters, but if you don't hold on to those customers, it doesn't matter how efficient your operating costs or supply chain is. And those who leverage external data will outperform competitors by double digits. People change management is a core chief data officer responsibility. And if this champion is not already part of your organization, make that job one after this conference. The fifth trend, data science loses its luster. Now, if some of you have risen through the data science organization, or maybe you're an aspiring data scientist, chief analytics officer, don't panic yet. Tom Davenport and DJ Patel dubbed the data scientist the sexiest job of the 21st century. But many are finding it not as impactful as we had hoped. Bear with me. I'll explain why and what to do about this. And lastly, that data will expose the wide gap in equity, but really, finally, empower change. So let's look at this first one. The fight to survive outweighs fear. You know, fear is often what holds us back. We like habits. We like the known. But look at everything that happened in 2020. Every industry was touched. Restaurants had to pivot overnight from only in-restaurant dining to online delivery. The construction industry, $10 trillion in digital innovation, and some saying what they had planned to take 10 years, they accomplished in 1 year or months. Online telehealth in the UK was 0% just 2 years ago, and in 2020 went to 100%. 300% growth rate, and online learning really made schools and learning possible. So the key with this is that not all of these changes are one time, a moment in time. The key is to take the best of the innovations that happened, even though you were forced to react. And research from the 451 group says that 80% of the organizations will keep some of the changes that they made last year. Part of what is enabling this change, this accelerated digital transformation, is the modern data and analytics cloud ecosystem. So think back again, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years ago. If you wanted an integrated solution, you had to settle for good enough capabilities, instead of pursuing a best of breed strategy. So think about this. With the modern cloud ecosystem, you can have, for example, Snowflake or Databricks for your cloud data platform. You can have ThoughtSpot for your augmented analytics or AI and search-driven analytics. And you can have, say, DataRobot or ThoughtIQ for your predictive analytics platform. And end to end, if you find an insight that's saying something like, hey, claims have spiked for this particular period, or we're about to have a stock out, you can collaborate in cloud-based platforms, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Slack. All these components are interoperable, and no longer is it coding to get from insight to action with low code and no code capabilities. The impact of this, I look, for example, at one of the most inspiring case studies, a visionary leader, Darren Petroza, at First Command Financial Services. Now, First Command Financial Services serves the US military. Think about how different it is if, say, your spouse is changing jobs every year. They need different types of credit lines. Their resume history may look a little different than somebody who's not in the military, getting new assignments, new posts every year or every few years. And yet, at the start of the pandemic, Darren and his team were able to break old processes and push forward visions that they had laid out using ThoughtSpot for search and AI-driven analytics and placing bets on a hybrid cloud strategy leveraging Databricks in Azure, and talk about impact. This is you as the data and analytics leaders. Darren talks about how his legacy will be that the things that he's been putting in place in the last year and this year will outlast him. That's the impact of the Chief Data Officer. So 3 strategies as you move forward here. Accelerate your cloud migration plans. And I think about those companies that have done this faster. It's not about saying, oh, we'll move slowly here or lift and shift. If you just lift and shift and you're not redesigning, you're having these legacy processes. It's also about using this time to disrupt the status quo. Break the old processes. Don't settle for things like cube building, aggregate reports, extracts that only give you the granular data, because it's about learning what your individual customers really want. And then focus on that first 1% of change. Now, this is a sad thing in our industry. We develop strategies that don't get implemented. So as you're thinking about your data and analytics strategy, you might have a 3 or 5 year vision. Only 14% of you, according to new research from MIT, say that you're doing excellent here or an A. Half of you say that you're not executing well at all. You give yourself a failing grade on executing to that strategy. Strategy is good for the long term. Focus on that first 1% of change, that first use case in the cloud, that first use case with modern analytics, and it's a quick win aligned to business value. Redefine the skills, redefine the processes, rinse, repeat, and then scale across the organization. So this second, customer experience analytics, takes center stage. This is hard because many of you do not have good, clean master data. You think about all the touch points: in person, digital, sales, contact center. Bringing all this data together so that you can get a holistic view of customer is important. This is where new concepts like data fabrics, data lakehouses may come into play. And also, it's about analyzing all the forms of interaction. This includes looking at text messaging, voice analytics for customers interacting with you via chatbots. Now, let's look at some impact in 2020, some pioneers here. Think about all that food delivery that newly happened in a pandemic. Just Eat is a subdivision of Just Eat Takeaway in Europe that delivered food to many people that were under lockdown. And they enabled restaurants across the UK and across Europe to get granular insights on what were the busy times and what were the hot sellers. When was their food spoilage? This has actually helped Just Eat win customer loyalty with these restaurants. And using search and AI-driven analytics, they're not stuck in this dashboard backlog. Instead, it's really non-analysts being able to ask new questions with a huge increase year over year over the number of monthly active users. This third trend, external data, leveraging this to get earlier warning signals and really across the whole value chain will let you outperform your competitors by double digits. 2 prime examples: Hershey's chocolates, using new data like human mobility to look at where we were shopping, where we were consuming chocolate, changed in the pandemic. So in the US, as we look at trick-or-treating, it wasn't about the small candy bags, it was more about s'mores that we were melting in the backyard. And so changing the supply chain allowed them to increase same product sales year over year, gain market share, and improve gross margin. Likewise, Canadian Tire. Now, if you're not familiar with this brand, they're a little bit like Asda in Europe or Walmart in that they have many different products. They were able to use search and AI-driven analytics combined with external data like human mobility, weather, traffic patterns, as well as inventory to see what were the new products people were buying, pivot the supply chain quickly to the key distribution centers or the key stores. So seeing, yes, that there were spikes in bikes and also sub-zero fridge freezers, barbecue grills, things like this. The impact, 20% increase year over year. Contrast that with how many retailers have had to shutter locations. I think of this quote from the head of AI research at JP Morgan Chase. We think about how many machine learning models broke because the past is no longer a predictor of the future. Instead, it's more about nowcasting, looking at more near real-time data, external data, alternative types of data that you didn't create in your internal transaction systems to really go from forecasting to nowcasting. And yet the range of data sources has exploded. Now, for some of you, this is about you monetizing your data, creating data apps, but I want you to think bigger. It's also about optimizing across the whole value chain or delivery chain. So in healthcare, this might be from the provider to the payer to improve patient outcomes, or supply chain from the manufacturer to the actual store to the customer. The choices are overwhelming. IDC has this market at a glance, data as a service. You have individual organizations creating data. So human mobility might come from an organization like Unicast, mining cell phone signals, or financial services like MasterCard that looks at detailed transactions available through a range of data marketplaces. So the only thing lacking here is really your imagination. Start with the business problem and think about what possible data might you bring to bear on that business question. Next, modernize your data flows. Now, why have we not leveraged all this external data before? Part of it is because some organizations were so focused on their internal data first, but also because this data was hard to transfer. Think about how you'd have to FTP this to be able to get to this data. Well, with Snowflake's data sharing capabilities, you can leave that data in one place. Databricks has also announced forthcoming data sharing capabilities. And I think Hulu summed it up very well. It's the end of FTP as we know it. This fourth trend, people change management must become a core CDO responsibility. Why? Because we keep throwing technology at people and we don't give them time to adapt, to figure out their new skills, to break the old processes. In fact, research that ThoughtSpot and Harvard Business Review co-sponsored identified lack of people change management as the main barrier to empowering frontline workers with data-driven insights. 44% said that was the main barrier. How do we overcome this? We have to go back to the basics and think about WIFM, or what's in it for me. Now, I like the way one of our customers phrases this. Maybe it's better to say, what's in it for us as an organization or as an industry? I'd say you have to do both. You have to think about an individual's personal job, their personal motivations. What are the new skills that they have to learn? A great example of this is from Schneider Electric, a global energy company, 130,000 employees around the world. Now, Schneider has a purpose here to deliver power, energy, in a sustainable way. So the sustainable way is part of their mission. They tie their mission to the individual employees and their goal in driving self-service analytics. They call it free up your energy. I love it. So free up your energy means stop working on dashboards that are out of date as soon as you publish them. Instead, work smarter using search and AI-driven insights to get out of that dashboard backlog. And on average, their analysts have saved 10 hours per week. But their lead analyst, Alana, she has saved 30 hours a week. Their BI adoption for employee managers, people analytics, is at 78%. Compare that to the industry average is between 25 and 35% of employees use data and analytics or a BI tool in their job. And these are people managers. Their job isn't data, their job is people. The WIFM, they care about retaining the best talent. They care about being able to create an inclusive workforce. Just such a great story. The other aspect here, it's about upskilling. So a people change management champion will say, where do we need to improve the skills? Work with HR and other leads to say, these are the skills, this is the plan we'll put in place. And data literacy is one of the key skills, or as I like to call it, at ThoughtSpot, we call it data fluency. So we're not just speaking and reading data, but we're thinking data. And not everyone needs to be at the same level. But think about how you first started reading. Now, some people will say, Cindi, we're not ready for a data-driven workforce because we have poor data fluency. We're not going to give self-service tools. But that's like teaching a child to read without giving them a book to practice on. So you want to provision safe data sets before you open up a broader library or more sophisticated data sets. How hard is this? Research from Accenture says that 21% of business people are confident with data. How can we create a data fluent world or a data-driven organization if people, business leaders, everyday decision makers are afraid of data? Now, I'm okay if you're nervous about it, but this is about the skill building. Keep learning, keep practicing, grow the skills. Data science loses its luster. What's going on here? Why is it no longer the sexiest job? Because there's so many failures. 85% have said of organizations, according to MIT, that big data and machine learning failed to produce a return on investment. Now, value is the ultimate measure of success. If you're failing fast as part of experimentation, that's good, you're learning. But if you don't operationalize the machine learning models as you have tuned them, then are you ever going to get to value? And if you haven't started with, why are we doing this at all? What's the desired outcome? Will you get to value? Why is this so hard? I think it's the way we've been training data scientists. We overemphasize the coding and the math, and they don't know how to apply this in a business context. We need to rebalance this using no-code or low-code platforms and de-emphasize the coding skills, increase the emphasis on the business domain knowledge. We also need to improve the communication skills or bring the concept of data storytelling as part of the business analytics and data science curriculum. If you're waiting for universities to graduate these new data scientists, forget it. You need to partner with local universities, sure, or create your own programs here to identify the skills and upskill, reskill constantly. This is where I like the case study from PwC, Scott Peck. He talks about how he's turning dashboard developers into analytics rock stars. This is really the analyst of the future. Now, some of you might use the term an analytics translator, where they know just enough about the data and analytics and they understand the business domain. And so they're bridging this divide. When I talk with customers here, it's really about having higher value analytics, not doing just descriptive reporting, but really getting to why, diagnostic, and having true business conversations. So that's the other part, why data science has not been sexy. It's the lack of value and too much time on the data prep and too much time on the mundane. Use AI to free up that time. This last point, 2020, the social injustices of 2020. If I have any hope, it's that data and AI actually will help us get to a better place. But is it really? If you have not yet seen the documentary Coded Bias, this is something that every data and analytics leader, every practitioner, and yes, even your families should watch this. It is relevant for families. It's not too technical. It profiles the work of Joy Buolamwini, researcher at MIT, who first identified some of the biases in facial recognition programs, and some of the work in the UK where street surveillance, facial profiling is being used in a dangerous way. So this is where intentions matter. As we think about AI and we automate so much more, we don't have good data, unbiased data. We don't have diverse teams building AI. And look at this example. Airbnb created its smart pricing algorithm with the intention of minimizing the pricing disparities between Black hosts and white hosts. And instead, research that is about to be released showed it backfired. It actually widened the gap by 20%. And yet, I look at some of the work that some organizations are doing to recognize the gaps in the bias, be transparent, and have difficult conversations about where this is failing. Organizations like Gannett actually publishing their data gaps and their measures on diversity and inclusion, or Starbucks measuring managers on the progress by which they are marching towards these goals. Kraft Heinz using things like sentiment and text analysis to look for early warning indicators of an inclusive culture or a less inclusive culture. And I love the new benchmarking that global payroll provider ADP recently released, because this stops organizations from producing vanity metrics where you can just take your internal data, go back and manipulate job codes to actually make it look like there is no pay gap. ADP is using benchmarking data across its customer base. It'll be interesting to see if NASDAQ will really be able to require diverse boards as we go forward. This is still being debated and played out. But I look ahead to 2021 and beyond and see a smarter world, a more fact-driven world, powered by data and analytics. Now, as we started at the beginning, did you ever imagine this would be your job, that you would be taking center stage as part of your organization's digital transformation? Probably not. Me? When I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a writer, a really famous writer, you know, those Nancy Drew books, maybe. And now you're telling me you're not into reading big books. I hope you still are. You're telling me you just want to hear the insights via audio, podcasting, or shorter books, ebooks. So I'm sharing with you some of the recommended resources. I suspect that if I ever do write that really great thriller, it will be a chief data officer as the key character. On behalf of ThoughtSpot, I thank you for attending. I encourage you to stop by our booth. We have this PDF on demand for you, available for you there. Ask more questions, and I wish everyone a great day and a great summer. Thank you.